In our previous video, we talked about variables, and in this video, we are going to continue with variables. We are going to talk about how to use different operators with variables. So, without further delay, let's get started. So, the first thing we have to do is to first include this header file, that is studio.h. By the way, this studio.h stands for standard input output. Now, after including the header file, we define the main function, which is an entry point to your program. So it returns 0. So the first group of operators that we are going to talk about are arithmetical operators. These include addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Besides these, there are some extra arithmetical operators in C. We will talk about them later. And these operations are done on variables. So we are going to first declare and initialize some variables. So I'm going to declare them as integer. So let's give it a meaningful name. Let's say number 1, and let's initialize it to 4. Similarly, we can define another variable whose name we have specified as number 2, and let's initialize it to 2. You can also declare and initialize them in a single statement separated by a comma, as both the variables are of same data type, so that's why we can write it in a single statement. So let's first talk about the plus operator, which is used to add the two numbers. Besides these two variables, we also need to declare another variable in which we are going to store their sum. And as we know, if we sum these two values, 4 plus 2 is going to be a 6, and 6 is also an integer. So this new variable would be of type integer. Let's name it result. Now we can add the two numbers and initialize the output to this result variable. So to do that, you first type the result and then equals to, and then the first number that you want to add, then the plus operator that's going to add the two numbers. After adding the two numbers, which will produce a 6 in our case, and that 6 will be initialized to this result. Now you can write it in this way by initializing this result variable in the next statement, or you can initialize and declare in one statement like this. What if I want to check if this result variable has been initialized to the sum of these two numbers? What I can do is simply print the value of this result, and this can be done with the help of a function known as printf that we have already used in our previous videos. So we'll first write the name of the function, then these parentheses, inside of these we write the codes, and inside of those codes we specify to print a function the type of value that I want to print. So this is the integer that I want to print, so I'm going to say %d format specifier, then comma, and after that the name of the variable, that is result. Now if I run this program, you will see that 6 will be printed on the screen. As you can see, we have been able to add the two numbers, place it in a variable, and then print that variable on the screen. Similarly, we can subtract the two numbers by simply changing this operator from plus to minus. So this is going to subtract 2 from 4. And if I run this, you see the result as 2. So 4 minus 2 is in fact 2. Now you can keep going on by changing this operator. So if I change this to this star operator, which is going to multiply these two numbers. So 4 into 2 is 8. So this should output 8. So if I run this, you see an output 8. And if you want to divide the two numbers, you simply change this operator to forward slash. This represents a divide operation, and this is going to divide the two numbers. So if I divide 4 by 2, I get a value of 2. So if I run this, I get a value of 2. So these were some basic arithmetic operators. Besides these operators, there are some extra operators in C programming. One of them is a modulus operator. The modulus operator works similarly, just like this divide operator. But the difference between the two is that this divide operator is going to divide the two numbers and then return their coefficient. While as a modulus operator, which is represented in C programming with this percent symbol, it's going to divide the two numbers, but instead of returning the coefficient, it's going to return their remainder. So in our case, we are getting a remainder of 0 because 4 is evenly divided by 2. Now if I run this, you see an output of 0, which is a remainder of their division. So far we have talked about operators that work on two operands. For example, here this is the first operand, this is the second operand. So this operator is known as a binary operator. Besides binary operator, there are something called urinary operator. As the name suggests, it's going to work on only one operand. So it's going to work on only one variable. And these operators are increment and decrement operators. So let's quickly talk about them. So the first urinary operator that we are going to talk about is an increment operator. And as we said, an urinary operator only works with one operand, one variable. So we need to remove one of the variables. So let's remove this one. And how would you represent an increment operator? Simply by writing plus sign twice. And what is this plus plus, which is known as increment operator, going to do? It's simply going to add 1 to the value of the variable it's attached to. Here it's attached to number 1 variable, which stores a value of 4. So this here is going to simply add 1 to this variable 4, which will produce a result of 5. To make it simpler, let's remove this result variable and let's change this to number 1. This statement is just going to increment the value of the variable by 1. So value of this variable in our case is 4. So this is going to increment it by 1. So this is going to produce a result of 5. This can also be written like this. So this statement is equal to this statement. So if I run this, you will get an output of 5. So if I run this, you see we get an output of 5. Similarly, if I change this variable to point to this variable, that's number 2, and then print that number 2 variable, so what is going to happen is that it's going to take this value of this variable, increment it by 1, which is going to produce 3, and then assign that value to this variable number 2, so in order to overwrite the previous value. So this is going to produce a 3. So if I run this, you see a value of 3. Similarly, there is another operator known as a decrement operator, and that's represented by this minus minus symbol. But instead of adding a 1 to the value of the variable, the decrement operator is going to decrement, is going to subtract 1 from the value of the variable. So in this case, this is going to produce a 1. So if I run this, you see a value of 1. Similarly, if I change this to number 1, this should produce a value of 3. So if I run this, you see a value of 3 printed on the screen. And now comes a strange part. These operators, these two operators that we just talked about, the increment and the decrement operator, each are of two types. Let's start from an increment operator. So These operators are of two types, the post increment and the pre-increment. We call it post increment when the operator comes after the name of the variable. So when you see an operator after the name of the variable, then that operator is known as post increment. Similarly, if I have the same operator before the name of the variable, then it's known as a pre-increment operator. And you can remember it like this. Pre means before. So this is a pre-increment operator. And post means after. So this is a post increment. Similarly, in case of a decrement operator, we have post decrement and pre-decrement. These post increment and pre-increment both are going to add or increment the value of the variable by 1. Now you may be having this question, if both the increment operators, the post and the pre-increment operator, if both of them are going to add or increment the value of a variable by 1, then what is the difference between the two? Recall that earlier I said incrementing a variable can also be written like this. So this statement is equal to this statement. In fact, this statement is a shorter form of this statement. So what this pre-increment operator is going to do is that it's going to first increment the value by 1 in this variable. In our case it's 4, so it's going to increment this 4 by 1, which is going to produce 5. And then it's going to update this variable. So it's going to override this 4 with this new value. But in case of a post increment operator, first we are going to return the value, that is in our case 4, and then we are going to increment this value. So in our case it would be 5, and then that value will be updated. So in post increment we first return and then increment, while as in case of pre-increment we first increment and then return the updated value. Now if I remove these two statements and if I increment the value inside of this printf function, so what do you think the output would be? So if I run this program, you see I get an output of 4. So what is going to happen, this post increment operator is first going to return the value of this variable, which in our case is 4, that this printf function takes and prints on the screen. After that, this post increment operator is going to increment the value of this variable, which in our case would be 5. In order to see the updated value in this variable number 1, we can write another printf function. So this printf function should display the updated value. So if I run this program, you see 4 and then 5. 4 is from the first printf function, and then you have 5 from the second printf function. So as you can see, 5 is the updated value. And if I change this post increment to a pre-increment, so what is going to happen is that it's first going to increment the value inside of this variable and update that. So it's going to override this 4 in our case by incrementing it to 1, which is going to produce a 5, and then update the value of this variable to 5, and then it's going to return that to print a function which is going to print 5. So both the statements, both the printf functions will print the same updated value. So if I run this, you see both of them print 5 and 5. In the same way, we have post decrement and pre-decrement. So if I change this to post decrement, this post decrement is first going to return the current value, that is 4, which this printf function is going to print, and then after that it's going to decrement that value to 3 in our case, and then this next printf function is going to print that updated value. Okay, so if I run this, you see 4 and 3. This 4 is from the first printf function and this 3 is from the second printf function. And if I change this to decrement, so this is going to first decrement and update the value that in our case would be 3 and return that 3 to the printf function, which is going to print 3. And in the next printf function we are going to print the same value 3. So in case of pre-increment and pre-decrement, this last printf function is of no use, right? Because this is going to print the same value. While in case of post-increment and post-decrement, we need this printf function to see the updated value. Now if I run this, you see a value of 3 and 3. In case if you're wondering how would I separate the two numbers, because it looks like 33, right? For that you have two options. You can either place a space in between the two numbers or you can separate them in two individual lines. So to do that, to put a space between the two numbers, you can either place a space after you print the first number or you can place a space before you print a second number, like this. So if I run this, you see a space between the two numbers. Now it does not look 33. And to place the two numbers on two individual lines, you can simply write \n. This is known as a newline character and this is going to bring the cursor to the new line. So now you can either write it after the first digit or you can write it before the second digit. So if I run this, you see the two numbers on two separate lines. And with that we come to an end of first group of operators, that are arithmetical operators. So as always, I would like to give you an assignment. The assignment is that you have to create a program that should declare and initialize two variables. One of the variables should be an integer and another should be a fractional variable. And using these two variables, you have to do all the arithmetical operations and print their result. And you can send your assignment in the email that will be provided in the description of this video. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I will see you in the next video. Till then, take care.